Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our show today. Thank you for being with me. I hope you guys are having a great summer and it's not too hot where you are like it is here. It's actually not that bad, but it is definitely a little heat wave in Orange County, California. So today's episode is all about sugar. This is such a good topic. I know so many of you are going to enjoy this one. Specifically, we talk about fructose, and I really learned a lot in this conversation with our guest, Chris. He explains why fructose affects the body differently than glucose, how it can signal the body to store fat and conserve energy, and why cutting out sugar can sometimes make cravings even worse. We also talk about inflammation, fatigue, brain health, perimenopause, why fruit is usually totally fine, and some simple things we can do to actually support our metabolism. And this is all science-backed. He has some really great information with studies behind it that I found so helpful, but in a very easy to digest way. So it's not too overwhelming. It's very interesting, and I learned so much. You can find Chris. He has a supplement called Sugar Shield that I just started, so I will definitely keep you guys posted once you learn about this topic. You're going to want to look into it like I did. So I'll put all of that in the show notes, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our show today. Chris, welcome to Learning to Glow.
Thank you so much for having me, Jess. Nice to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. You're going to be sharing some information with us that I know our listeners always want more knowledge about. And, you know, when it comes to weight loss and sugar and like what we can do to help our bodies, this is very important to my listeners. So I, first of all, would love if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we can get into this topic.
Sure. Okay. So I don't actually come from like a scientific background, but about 5 years ago, when I had a little girl, I decided that I needed to start taking my health seriously because that would be what a responsible parent did. But my background actually comes from like kind of user experience and synthesizing research. Like I worked in user research, and so when I started digging into this stuff, I like innately tried to find like cohesive patterns across what I was reading. And I started to realize that there's a very big gap in what we're understanding because so much of the research points in a single direction. And when you start looking at the entire map of like how our bodies work under that lens, it's like all of the different debates that we've had over many, many decades start to resolve themselves. And so I was like, okay, well, I got to dig deeper. And that was like 5 years ago. And basically since then, I've been drowning in confirmation. And it's really exciting because it really kind of provides a new lens as to how our bodies work in a really, really simple way. And ultimately, it traces back to sugar. And it's interesting because like, if you look at kids, they'll tell you, okay, well, I know my mom says I'm not supposed to have too much sugar. Like every single human knows that it's like the one thing that we should probably be careful with and moderate, but we haven't really talked about why. Not to like a real mechanistic level and saying like, okay, this is why sugar is a problem for us. And this kind of resolves that. So like if we were to say, okay, our assumptions might be sugar has glucose, and now we wear glucose monitors because we recognize that if we have high glucose levels, then that becomes problematic for us. Fair. But I would argue that that's sort of like saying that too much fuel in your car is bad for your car because glucose is your body's preferred fuel. So if your brain doesn't have glucose, like you could probably die within like a very short period of time. So is that really the logical place to start? I would argue that the other half of sugar, which is fructose, has probably been this quiet thing that we didn't pay enough attention to. And now we're starting to understand how the mechanics of it actually work. And it's showing that it might actually be the bigger issue really behind how sugar affects our health.
Maybe we could start there because I think it's like for a lot of people, sugar is just like a blanket statement, like sugar bad, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
so, can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between glucose and fructose? And as far as like, what do we need to know? What are some 101 basics here? What do we need to know as far as that goes?
Love it. Okay. So, sugar, what we typically call sugar is two simple sugars bound together. And one of them is glucose and one of them is fructose. And it's just a simple 50-50 split. So glucose is basically the body's preferred fuel. When we eat carbohydrates, we basically capture the glucose from it and we convert it into glycogen, which is basically your body's fast fuel. It's like the water weight that we kind of recognize is actually stored glycogen. So that little carbohydrate gets bound to, I think, like a 3-to-1 ratio with water. So that's your water weight. That now the body can easily break that down and send it directly into your cells as fuel. And that's really critical for your brain because your brain consumes like 20% of your fuel. And that is in the form primarily of glucose. We could talk about ketones, but that's separate. So
Okay.
basically, glucose is fuel. Fructose, the other half, they didn't really classify it as to like, this is what it does until super recently. And even I would say like maybe 6 weeks ago, there was a research paper that was put out by one of the strongest authorities on fructose, and basically said that separate from it being a calorie, it is primarily a regulatory signal that controls metabolic health. And that should give us like serious pause. It's like, okay, now we've got fuel and then we have a signal that controls our health. Like, what in the world? So we put them together now, and we really have to understand what fructose does then, if we're going to understand how this works. So fructose effectively controls your cellular energy. It controls the conversion of fuel, of glucose, into ATP, which is your cell's energy. So it's basically like saying when you eat sugar, you're taking in fuel and you're taking in a conservation signal at the same time. Your body's saying, we've got fuel. Let's try and hang on to it as much as possible and stretch that because we've got this opportunity that we should really take advantage of because we're an animal and life can be hard. So then we need those good things to help us survive a little bit longer. So it starts to give this like survival lens on how sugar works in our body. And so primarily we'll talk about sugar because that's where we're primarily exposed to it today. But fructose exists in fruit. Fructose exists in high fructose corn syrup, which I know it sounds bad and we've kind of villainized it, but really all we're talking about is like 55% fructose compared to glucose. So it barely moves the needle. It just happens to be more bioavailable because it's like a liquid form. And so those are the main places that we'll encounter fructose. But when we go a little bit deeper, we'll actually find out that the body makes fructose in response to a number of things that we already know we need to be careful of. High glycemic carbohydrates, salty foods, dehydration and hypoxia, alcohol. So like many of the ways that we kind of we want to protect our health, suddenly everything starts to trace back to perhaps this survival signal where it's telling our body to conserve. And so if you want to just make this really, really simple, fructose is sending a conservation signal to your body. It's telling your body to store. And so I don't know about you, but personally, I don't really want to tell my body to store fat on a daily basis. And that's really what it's doing. It's like it's giving your body the opportunity to hang on to as much as possible because as a survival signal, it's saying difficult times might be coming or difficult times might be here and we need to like protect ourselves. So it's like this protection mechanism.
Yeah. I was thinking, okay, when you started to first talk about that, I was like, okay, what does this mean for weight loss? Because back in the day, there you didn't have food readily available like we have today. Like we have so much, and I definitely also don't want my fat stored more than I more than I
Right?
need.
Yeah. It's
I
like,
mean, that's like an issue that a lot of times, like what you said, a lot of people maybe don't think about the fact that the carbohydrates, like you said, the high carbohydrates that affects the fructose in our body, is what you're saying. So, talk to us a little, because I know everybody on this show. A lot of people are very interested in what does this mean for weight gain? And a lot of women that I speak to in this part of life, a lot of the women listening are in midlife. They're having a little bit of struggle more than they used to, as far as like let's
yeah,
call it the storage part, what our
yeah,
body does hanging onto that fat. It's a little bit more difficult to release that. So a lot of people will think, okay, well, maybe I do need to cut out sugar. And then I also was thinking about how popular the keto diet was. And you're saying, glucose is
yeah.
so important for our body. So I know I threw a lot at you, but let's start with like, what does this all mean if we are on a weight loss journey and we are storing this extra fat?
That's a great question. So it'll help to kind of understand the biomechanics just a little bit. So basically, when you metabolize fructose, that's not in your gut, that's like in your cells. When your cells start to convert it, it converts your ATP, so your cellular energy, into a waste product. So normally your ATP is like a rechargeable battery. Like it
Mm.
drops from a triphosphate into a duophosphate, and then your mitochondria boost it back up. So it's like this little rechargeable battery. But when you introduce fructose into it, it will burn your ATP. It actually drops it into a monophosphate, and then it burns it all the way down to uric acid. Uric acid in your cell causes inflammation, it causes cellular stress, and effectively, over time, like not right away, but over time, that cellular stress dampens the performance of your mitochondria. It actually like restructures it so that it can't produce as much energy as it really wants to. And that's really where everything starts to fall apart. So basically, if you think about, I'd like to think of it like a bottleneck, where it's like you've got fuel on one side, and then you've got this signal that tightens the bottleneck, that tightens the amount of energy coming out. So then you basically create a cell that is so hungry because it's not getting enough energy. It's running on like fumes basically. And so it sends a signal back to your body to say, I'm starving, like not in your gut, but like on a cellular level, like my cells are not getting the energy they need. And so it tells your brain, hey, we're starving. We need to eat more food. And then it becomes a loop where it's like, I'm going to just eat more sugar, then I'm going to eat more carbohydrates, I'm going to eat more of a whatever. But then it sends the signal to tighten that bottleneck even more. And so you can start to see where it's like you've got cravings on one side and you've got excess weight on the other. And it like, as long as you keep the loop going, you basically just compound the problem. And it speaks back to like a survival mechanism, because in the wild, our opportunities and like abundance and scarcity always ebb and flow, but our modern diet doesn't.
Right.
And so basically, we just keep feeding the same signal, and it kind of resolves why we can be overfed and overweight and yet always hungry and always tired at the same time. And so like bringing it back to like perhaps women as they start to age a little bit, when women hit towards menopause, and their estrogen starts dropping, there's an interesting parallel that happens here, because typically what will happen is your ability to rid the body of uric acid drops a bit. And so if you remember, that uric acid is sitting at the center of this equation, where that's the stress that is causing your mitochondria to drop. And so if you lose the ability to flush that uric acid out of your body fast enough, then it's just going to make that bottleneck tighter and tighter as it goes. So it's almost like it puts women and men back on the same level as they get to a certain age, where like men don't really have that advantage with estrogen levels. But when we lose that little bit of advantage, then it makes sense as to why suddenly your body's not really responding the way it wants to anymore, where it's losing the ability to create cellular energy. And then the loop forms where you keep feeding it more and more of what is going to cause more and more of a tighter bottleneck and effectively just store in more and more energy in the form of fat.
Yes. Okay. Well, I want to
Does that make
get
sense?
to, yes, totally. I love that. I want to get to like, what are some mistakes that we can work on when it comes to this process in our bodies? But before that, you did mention something. You mentioned cravings. And also, like, when I think of sugar and the bad parts of sugar, when you think of the negative things that people talk about, they talk about cravings. It's almost like the more you eat, have you heard, like, the more you eat sugar, like processed sugar, the more you crave it. And it's just like you said, this cycle. But also, how does that affect our mood, like our emotions, and it affects our brains too? Can you talk to us a little bit about that too?
So, yeah, absolutely. So this, you have to think of this like fructose metabolism, which is what we're really talking about here. It happens in energy sensitive tissues. So it first of all will happen in your gut lining a little bit. But that's typically not the main source of metabolic dysfunction. The bigger one is liver. And fructose metabolism is very strong in the liver. It'll probably soak up about 80% or so of the dietary fructose that you eat. Kind of filters the rest of the body in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense as to that's why you'll start to see liver fat form if you have a high sugar diet or a high alcohol diet. It's like that's going to be the primary place where things will start to go wrong. But beyond that, the other energy sensitive tissues are your vascular system, so the lining of your blood vessels. Those are very energy sensitive as well, and that's probably starting to talk about like the body made fructose a little bit more because most of it, the dietary, would be sucked up in the liver. But then the other side of it is the brain, which as you mentioned. So the brain's a fascinating one because fructose itself doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So then you would probably think, well, then it's not an issue. However, they've actually identified that fructose metabolism is very active in the brain, especially in targeted areas. And so what happens is, if you look at there's this pathway in the body that allows glucose to be converted into fructose, and it seems to activate when glucose levels are high. And so if you think about it from that perspective, we know the brain runs on glucose. Like it's a huge soak when it comes to that. So then if you have high glucose levels in the brain, that means that fructose metabolism is activating. And then the same downstream energy conserving, low energy signaling thing is going to happen in the brain. And it's basically starting to look like that's how the brain triages energy. So whereas like we have different ways of like triaging like the different programs that our body runs, in the brain, this might be how it's doing that. And so if you think about it maybe from the survival perspective again, it's like, if I don't have enough food, or if there's some uncertainty in my environment, then what are the things that I would want to maybe turn off, and what the things I want to prioritize? I'm going to need to prioritize movement. I'm going to need to prioritize vision, because otherwise I'm never going to find food again. I'm never going to be able to eat again. But do I really need reproduction? Do I really need short-term memory? Things like, and those kind of ones where it's like, okay, now are we going to talk about the downstream effects of like PCOS or PMOS as it's been reclassified?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we going to talk about like cognitive dysfunction, like Alzheimer's disease and those kind of patterns? Because it all starts to fit really well. Where if we just talk about Alzheimer's for like 2 seconds, like basically there is massive evidence that targeted areas of the brain are running on low cellular energy. And then that's what kind of seems to emerge these plaques and things like that. And what happens in Alzheimer's patients, they can still see, they can still move, they can still generally find food until things progress to a state where they're struggling so hard that even those start falling apart. But it kind of gives an argument as to like maybe how these things form and why they form as well, just simply because it's like this energy triage is happening. And so when you start to look at it that way, it's like suddenly this little survival pathway that just is in our sugar really could be having a major effect across the entire body. Just as this, I start to think of it like an alarm signal, where a fire alarm is fine in a single room, but we never do it in a single room. Like we need it throughout the entire house to make sure that if anything goes wrong, we know about it. And perhaps this is working the same way, where it's like in all of the energy sensitive areas of your body, it uses fructose to trigger conservation because it's going to help us in the short term. The problem only becomes when we leave it on too long, because fructose is not a toxin. It's not going to kill the cell or anything like that. All it does is it drops the energy level down to the minimal levels, because it's perhaps trying to, in a way, triage energy and like manage it and say like, okay, we need to get through a bit of a difficult time here, or take advantage of an opportunity so that the body can last a little bit longer.
Is that why we're so tired? Like,
Yes.
is that why we feel so exhausted if we're living this kind of a diet?
I would say I have like a 99% confidence of that personally. Yeah, I would say so. Because if you think about it, so like the cell has less energy, and what happens within the cell to get there is it's creating a lot of inflammation.
Mm.
And so like, doesn't that just sound like everybody? Like we're tired and we're sore and we're like, we don't have that vitality that we feel like we should have, or maybe the vitality that we had when we were young.
Mm.
It's like it switches off. So I think this is that unspoken little bit of burden that's kind of just under everyone. And I would also say it's not anyone's fault, because this is like written into our biology. What do we like to eat? We like to eat sweet foods and salty foods and savory foods. And all of those foods can now be traced back to this signal. It's like maybe the reason that we like those things is because it would help the animal survive. In contrast, like we don't like bitter foods. Like some of those other flavors, like we don't really have an affinity towards. And those are the ones that are maybe perhaps more like the fat burning compounds, that like the polyphenols and things like that, where it would counteract some of this signal. So it starts to look like a balance.
Yeah, if you're struggling with fatigue, or like if you're really tired, it's funny how the body craves, the ice cream, or you're not craving broccoli. And I mean, some people might, but like I think it's just funny how that the body works and what it actually looks like to what we want and what we need as far as in the moment for cravings to get us through. I remember being really exhausted, and it's like your body's like, okay, what do I need to give me that quick energy so that I can make it through the rest of the day? I wanted to get your opinion on if we're talking about sugar and ingesting it and what can happen in the body. What about fake sugar? Like, what about something like a Splenda or something that's been marketed as more healthy, which is like a stevia, for example, but it's not real sugar? What do you think about that?
I think, just to be completely frank, I think those are great. Okay. I think that if you were to hang on to those, like I know that there's like some argument that like some of these things are over processed and maybe there's like a little bit of a problem there. Maybe. But like I think the risk is so minimal compared to the fact that we're actually providing a body a survival signal. I think that is the real challenge, because if you're crushing your cellular energy the whole time, then that is going to be a persistent problem that could last perhaps years, much more so than like a tiny little toxin. So I would say yes. I think that those are great. Mm-hmm. The challenge might be that if you're trying to attempt to cut sugar just with restriction, that's a really high hill to climb. And because if you think about it, that now means that we have to like be really careful about added sugars. We have to be really careful about high glycemic carbohydrates. We have to be careful about alcohol. We got to watch our salty food. We got to make sure we get good sleep and hydrate really well. And it's like, well, then this is the same story we've been talking about for decades. So it's like, that's fine. I'll do some of it. I'm not going to live that way for the rest of my life. Like that's the challenge, where it's like, how do we actually make this actionable in a real way? I think that's the major challenge underlying this whole thing, because if this is like a survival system rather than like a single molecule, if it was just sugar, it would be easy, but it's not, right? That's the challenge. It's like the body is going to, if we think of it like this redundant alarm system, then it explains why someone that is an alcoholic or like drinks a lot of alcohol they go dry, and suddenly they eat a lot of sugar. It is so well documented that that happens.
Yes, it
Like
is.
it automatically, it's like the body tries to compensate. And so if we're doing all of this compensation, just trying to keep the system alive because the body is trying to conserve, we got to figure out some other strategies a little bit.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those. Give us some strategies, like, so we can work with our biology, right? Like,
Yes.
one thing I'm kind of taking away from this is let's work with it and not try to fight it. Because can we do that? No, probably not. Maybe for a little bit, but how can we give us some strategies, especially because a lot of times when we learn these strategies and these tips to help support our bodies, that's probably when making the weight loss, if that is a goal of yours, whoever's listening, that's probably when things will start to click and work. So can you give us some tips on what can we do about this?
I would love to. Would it be a good idea to talk about fruit for 2 seconds? Just because I have a feeling that like everyone's like, well, then I don't want to, like, I'm not going to cut fruit because fruit's healthy. I do agree, but I feel like there's like this kind of aside where it's like we have to address that because otherwise the argument falls apart.
Absolutely,
so fruit
yeah.
is amazing because fruit is a source of fructose. We know that, but it helps to think of what fruit is like in the wild and when it goes in, when it ripens and the process and all that. So like fruit starts as this dull, colorless, fibrous thing that is telling the animal, don't eat me yet. And the reason it tells you don't eat you yet is because the seeds aren't ready. So from the plant's perspective, this is like how the seeds will be distributed. I want an animal to eat me and then take my children elsewhere, right? That's how this works for the plant's perspective.
Mhm.
And so what it does is when it ripens, so first of all, it's protecting itself. So it has really high fiber, it has high polyphenols. It doesn't have sugars in it yet, it has no bright colors. So it's basically like it's protecting itself almost with fat burning compounds. And then it ripens. And then you've got bright colors that say, come and see me, smells that attract. It's full of sugar. The fructose content goes up and the fiber drops off. And so it's like all of those little signals start getting replaced. And then really it almost makes sense as to why it ripens right before winter, where it's like the animal will now come and eat it. And if they eat enough of it, then they might activate this little bit of conservation signal right before wintertime. So you look at a bear, they'll eat like hundreds of thousands of like Oregon grape berries. Like they just all out binge on fruit if they get the opportunity, or honey, or whatever it might happen to be. Things that we see them as healthy, and then yes, they are. But there's so much context here that matters, where it's like the same fruit can go from this unripe fat burning thing that we don't really want to eat on our counter to like a fully ripened and sweet, delicious thing. And so with that context, I think fruit can be a little bit better understood, where it's like it serves a purpose in the wild. And because there's so much complexity there, it's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to say like, okay, I'm not going to eat any fruit. It's just like the body can handle that little bit of whole fruit quite easily without really activating the survival signal too far. And so I wouldn't say like, maybe don't juice your fruit, maybe don't dry your fruit just because like that bit of processing allows you to eat way more than you would otherwise. But otherwise, fruit's pretty good. Yeah. So then like back to your question of like, okay, so then what do we do about it? Don't worry about fruit. But it makes a lot of sense that you start with just cutting sugar. That like, if that's the main dietary source, then cut it out. The problem is that many people can last like 3 days and then they fall off the rails. So the craving, you kind of have to ask the question of like, why do cravings get worse when I cut sugar? Like based on this whole argument. So I think it's actually very simple. If you think about this, so it's half glucose and half fructose. So glucose is fuel and fructose is restricting access to the fuel. And so if you take away both, what you've basically done is you've taken away fuel and you've increased your fuel needs. So then cravings actually make more sense. So it's like if you're opening the bottleneck and increasing the demand and taking away what's going to fill the demand, then it makes sense is like cut the fructose, but actually increase the glucose just temporarily so that you're like filling that little bit of demand. And so I would say if you cut sugar, great idea. but replace it with complex carbohydrates, replace it with glucose sources. So just for a while, like I know most of us probably want to go low carb. We recognize that's beneficial, but do that later after you've like restored your cellular energy. And then later on, you can start talking about, okay, maybe if you want to level up, you drop your carbs, you drop your alcohol, but do that after your cells are starting to kind of fire a little bit better, after you feel the cravings drop and your energy's rebounding a little bit. That's a good signal that that might be the time to kind of level up a bit.
Oh, that's great. I've never
Does that
heard
make
that before.
sense?
Oh, totally. So with the glucose sources, you're talking about things like sweet potatoes and,
Perfect.
things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like things that are not going to be a super high hit of glucose that'll just spike your glucose levels, like white rice and that kind of thing. Like sweet potatoes, perfect.
It's
Yeah,
so
slow
smart.
carbs, right? Yeah.
I love that. That's such an actionable thing because I bet you too, if you're doing it that way and not just cutting everything at the same time, and I can imagine that you would feel so much better through that process too.
So much better. The other little tip I'd give is maybe using MCT oil as kind of like a break glass move, where it's like, so MCT oil it's like it's not glucose, it's like exogenous ketones. So your cells will soak up ketones, no problem. It's like an alternative fuel source, right? And so it's like if your cell is super hungry and you're not going to hit that level with glucose, just give it some ketones and it'll calm down. And so then it turns the cravings off a little bit faster. As like I'm not suggesting this is like do this forever, but like in getting over that little hump where it's like you're trying to let your cells wake up again with energy, I think it's a good move too.
Yeah. And then, so what is your philosophy about, so say you want to cut out the sugar and, you're doing it in this way, you're adding in some oil. What are your thoughts on after you've been living this lifestyle, you're sustaining it, and you want an ice cream? Like, what do we go back? Are we allowed to like have treats, or do you have to start that process all over again? Talk to us about the sustainability with like enjoying our life. And
I think that's
also,
probably the most important question, because it's like, okay, now we're talking about a survival system that's never going to turn off,
yeah.
right? Like you do all of that and maybe cravings will go down, but it doesn't mean that ice cream isn't going to taste good. Right? So it's like every once in a while that's going to creep up on you and you'll have agency over the choice to eat it way more than otherwise because the cravings are gone, but it still is going to be good. And honestly, I don't think that a restrictive diet for the rest of your life is sustainable. I mean, I really praise the people that can accomplish that, but I don't I personally, that's not how I want to live, because I want to enjoy life. So the other side of this topic is really discussing, can we control fructose metabolism itself? Because if sugar and carbohydrate and like high glycemic carbs and alcohol and salty foods and dehydration and all these things are all activating fructose metabolism, can we just control that instead of everything? I think that is where the research is going to end up going. And as far as I can tell, everything hinges on an enzyme called fructokinase. That's what causes that initial shift of like consuming ATP and degrading it into uric acid. If you don't have fructokinase, that doesn't happen. And a portion of our population doesn't. There's a small group in our that has a benign genetic condition called essential fructosuria, and they just don't have fructokinase and they don't get sick. Like they don't get metabolic illness. It's the weirdest thing. And so it sort of says maybe this little enzyme is disposable, and this is actually the reason it exists, is to kind of activate this survival signal. And it also tells us that like it's cool when you don't have it, the body just pees it out. That's if fructose urea, like it's just, that's what it's named after. Just your body just pees out the fructose. It's like, hey, that's kind of cool. And so like a number of pharma companies are like researching this. But in my research along the way, I discovered that some of them have actually identified polyphenols that do the same thing. And that's where I got super excited, because like, I think for 3 years, I was like, this is really amazing. But the only actionable thing I can see to do is to just not eat sugar and like do this like insane control over my diet.
Yeah.
So basically, there is a polyphenol called luteolin that is been identified as a potent fructokinase inhibitor. And so that, to me, from what I'm seeing, is the most sustainable way to make this actually work. Where it's like you block to the extent possible, you buffer and block that signal from happening. And so you're protecting your cellular energy. And then all of the diet stuff almost becomes less critical. It's like, yes, do the healthy stuff to the extent you want to the extent possible. But I've always got this little bit of insurance happening in the middle. And it's like, if I do want an ice cream every once in a while and it feels worth it, then sure, I'll have one. And I'll just make sure that I'm like properly buffering the signal that's going to happen in my body. So that's the way I've been living for the last 3 years. And I love it. Like it is so liberating. I can't even tell you. So from my own personal experience, after taking a liposomal form of luteolin for about like a month, I woke up with this like euphoric feeling that I've never had before. It felt like literally my cellular energy switched back on, and I felt amazing. And right around the same time, cravings just all out stopped. And me and my wife were sitting there one night and was like, do you want like a cocktail or something? It was like this little moment. It was like, we should enjoy this. And both of us kind of looked at each other like, not really. Like, that sounds like it would be nice, but I don't really feel like it. And it was like weird enough that we're like, it stood out in our minds. Around the same time, we stopped eating like cereal around 9 o'clock or whatever, like the late night carb for no reason thing shut off. So all of that started happening. And then over the next, I'd say 6 months, I lost like 25 pounds without really trying. It just sort of melted away. So I feel like this ability to control that enzyme is going to be where everything changes. I feel like that if everything is saying that this is where your cellular energy is dropping, then maybe controlling it is going to give us the most liberation, where we can eat healthy, but not so obsessively as we used to.
Yeah, because that's the goal. Like,
right? Yeah.
You want to enjoy your life. So tell us more about the supplement. Like,
so
you're and how you use it.
Yeah. So after doing this, like, I want to be very clear, the research, all of that came first. And it was like, and I honestly started taking something I just found online because like I was experimenting. I didn't expect any of those results, but it was like, whoa, okay, this is stronger than I expected. So eventually we came around to the point where we developed our own supplement called Sugar Shield. Okay. And so it's as strong of a attempt to control this pathway as we can come up with at the moment. So it's a liposomal form of luteolin, and that's important because the body luteolin doesn't really get through the gut very easily. Most of the preclinical research on it is done like with injection and that kind of thing. So that protects it so that it can actually get into all the different areas of the body. That little bit of I don't know if you know what liposomes are, but they're basically like encapsulating the ingredient in like a little pocket of fat so it survives the digestive tract. Yeah. So it has a high potency luteolin, and we also pair it with tart cherry extract because that's well researched to help flush uric acid. So this whole concept of like you're trying to protect the cell and get rid of the byproduct that would be slowing your mitochondria. Just at the moment, this is the best attempt we can make, and like trying to kind of work on this pathway.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, the results are nuts. Like, I think we're probably coming up on like maybe 80% report like a huge drop in cravings and improved energy within the first month.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
so it's exciting.
It's so exciting. I mean, when you think about it, you're like, well, kind of my weight kind of just effortlessly came off. But when you're like, all of a sudden those cravings aren't in your ear all the time, it's like, oh, it's easy to see.
Yeah, and you have choices.
Yes. It's not like I've had cravings that are so strong and I'm like, I can't, it's almost like you can't stop yourself. And then I've had times where I'm more balanced and it's like, oh, I could have a bite of that or I could not. But like those cravings with sugar can be so intense. I do know about liposomes. I'm in skincare, and that's something we use a lot with the skin. They encapsulate different active ingredients. And also the cherry juice is very interesting. I do that at night for sleep. So I wonder if that helps with the sleep with your clients as well.
the more you pull on this, like our research, I didn't expect us to go there, but it basically started to resolve a new model for metabolic dysfunction. And it freaked me out. It was like, I was not planning to go there, but basically, like, you look across all metabolic disease and the same signature appears. Low cellular energy, high inflammation, insulin resistance develops,
Yeah.
and like high uric acid levels are there under the surface. Like, it's the same signal that we're seeing across all of us. So I'm not saying that fructose causes all metabolic dysfunction, but if cellular energy does, like a drop in cellular energy, then this might be why we went wrong, because toxins, environment, all like genetics, all of those will play a role into that. But I see that as like a base level. That's the stuff you can't control very well.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're adding sugar on top of it. And that's more the universal thing. So I feel like, and I started looking back through like the historical record of like when sugar arrived, and like gout was back there and hundreds of years ago and all of that kind of thing. It feels like this is what tipped the scales into dysfunction, because suddenly we just started layering this on top of all of our little idiosyncrasies. And if it has this direct impact on cellular energy, I feel like maybe that's why chronic diseases cluster. It might be why we have so much difficulty controlling them and moderating them. I feel like this might be really big.
Well, this is, oh my gosh, it's so interesting. I can't wait to get mine. I am going to be trying it and I'll share with everybody what I think. But if you could just share, like, people want to learn more about you or Sugar Shield, can you tell us where everybody can find you? And if there's any last things you want to share with us, let us know.
Totally. So our website is livhealth.com. So LIV3 health.com. And if you wanted to go deeper into like I just kind of hinted at, this opens up conversations on obesity and cravings and fatigue and insulin resistance and fatty liver disease and cardiovascular diseases and neurodegenerative stuff, all of that. I have a little YouTube channel that I've just been firing up over the last little while called the Fructose Model. And we're trying to like check out all those different things, because if this is as big as we think it is, then it should be unifying. Like the caloric model will still matter, but maybe this answers why we overconsume calories. Or the insulin resistance model, it still matters, but maybe this is kind of arguing, well, maybe it's an adaptation because you've crippled your cellular energy, which is an interesting one, because it's like, it makes a lot of sense. If you were to allow too much glucose into your cell and the cell couldn't handle it, that would be toxic. It would like, that too much substrate would actually kill the cell. And so maybe insulin resistance is pushing back as an adaptation, saying like, I can't handle anymore. Stop trying to feed me so much. And so like all of the existing ideas that we've had, whether it's diets, like cutting carbs, the keto diet, like maybe this is why this helps. Or cutting alcohol, maybe this is why this helps. All these, like, it sits at the center because it appears to be upstream of all of that. And that's what's so exciting to me. So yeah, our website's livehealth.com, and you can find Sugar Shield there, or dig into our white papers and all sorts of stuff if you want to dive into the research here. And to be frank, I want this challenged, because if this is as significant as we think it is, then it should be easy to break. And if it's not easy to break, then we need to like resolve it. Like we need to figure out where the gaps are so we can actually figure this out, because it even if it's not exactly true, it will give a huge advancement to trying to understand how our metabolism works.
Yeah. Well, I love everything I love how you explain everything to us. So it seems like a complicated thing for people who aren't good at all of this research, but you've really helped it break it down in such a digestible way. So thank you so much. I will make sure I link everything, your YouTube, your website, in the show notes. So just go to the show notes so it's easy to find. And Chris, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Jess. It was a great chat.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.